should be good to go.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. Yes, I'm calling from Bellingen. I'm on Gumbaynggirr country, and I would like to pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. So what I'm wanting to talk about today, so long as you can all hear me, is I want to look at citizen science. I've entitled the presentation, Who's Missing Out? I could go into great detail theoretically about concepts around citizen science, but instead I really want to focus in on an emerging project that I'm involved in, and now moving forward thanks to the help of an AEL small grant. So I'm going to just dive straight in and get on with the presentation. So the issue that I want to raise today, and it's something that is very similar in terms of who has voice and agency. There is a lot of exclusion of the general public from decision making around management of our natural resources, and forestry and logging, old growth logging, impacts on koala habitat, bushfire, etc., is something that we're probably all slightly familiar with. But the issue I want to talk about today is the conversion of native forests to plantations. This is a global issue, and this slide could really apply to anywhere on Earth. The other problem that we have with the conversion of forests to plantations, whether that's oil palm or industrial monocultures for wood pulp, is increasing every year. And in addition to that outright total obliteration of native vegetation, forest remnants that survive the initial clearing during ongoing management are also subsequently being cleared. So these very important little island hotspots of biodiversity that exist within forest ecosystems that manage to hang on before the plantations were established, and afterwards, they too are being cleared. And despite private market driven sustainability certification, you know, which is one of those so-called compromises of neoliberal environmentalism, a bit like carbon trading and offsets, despite the fact that we have eco-labelling of good wood, and including the certification of plantations, this practice is still continuing. This is partly due to a lack of data. People simply cannot identify these areas, and/or they don't want to identify these areas. And also in our plantation legislation and our native forest management and vegetation management legislation, there's an awful lot of contradictions around whether native vegetation can or cannot be cleared. But one of the central problems that we have is that citizens basically don't have a voice and they don't have agency. They can, yes, they can jump up and down on the street or cause trouble in tunnels on the way to the airport, or be part of Extinction Rebellion. But when it comes to actual local people on the ground directly affected by these activities, they're pretty much excluded. So we have this problem. If we want to stop this, forests need to be identified before they're converted. But there are so many of them in several states here in Australia, which amounts to millions of hectares and potentially hundreds of thousands of hectares of remnants that are invisible and simply disappearing. We really need economies of scale to identify them, meaning that we need multiple researchers as well as public awareness, empowerment and action. And there has been this emerging effort to use citizen science to solve this problem of dealing with environmental crises at scale. So I've been part of a trial project in New South Wales to recruit, train and mentor citizens, students and international participants, but based around New South Wales, to use simple, intuitive online remote sensing platforms like Google Earth Pro. What I'm talking about is a move away from things like ArcView and QGIS, which are essentially highly technical and digital, and that's kind of an epistemology of, you know, expertism and being very clever, to a more amateur visual approach that such platforms as Google Earth Pro offer. And we've been training, I don't want to say ordinary, but for argument's sake, let's just say straightforward ordinary citizens to use historical imagery via Google Earth Pro and historical aerial photography in archives, to import that imagery and harvest plans, to draw what are called polygons around those remnant areas, and then drop them into ground-based apps like Avenza and Mergin, where you can actually physically be in the field and see exactly where you are and exactly where that polygon is and what is and is not still there. And obviously, once you have that information, to alert the authorities to the presence of those remnants. And now I'm going to try and play a movie. These areas in purple are all the plantations that exist in New South Wales. Within these plantation areas, these remnants are incredibly important. They are connected to the native forest that's outside the plantation area. This is forest that existed before 1974, and there were pre-invasion date trees within this area that were taken by forestry this time round.
It's really empowering to just see how much we can learn and what can be done to actually protect our forests from logging. It all starts with investigative online work. Once we get a good overview, then we go into the forest and we verify on the ground. We can actually see the large trees and verify them, and that's the ground truth. 153. And when we get all this information, we report it to the authorities, and then they have to act. And that is how we can save our natural forests.
What was once intact forest and home to many threatened species, including the koala, is now wasteland. But we can stop this, and we need your help. We need you to become a citizen scientist and adopt plantation. Here, we will train you to use simple online tools that provide you with the tools we need to bust forestry corporations' claim that they don't convert native forest into plantation.
So there we go. I hope that worked out. So the preliminary trials, rather than trails, that we've been involved with the help of citizen scientists, believe it or not, have already saved several remnants in New South Wales. It's really incredibly empowering for someone to look at an area, identify a remnant, draw a polygon, go through the historical photography and prove that it has existed there in time and should not be cleared. And it's a really magical experience, actually, to save these tiny little areas. Some of the fragments are, you know, less than 0.3 of a hectare, but to a koala, where those trees are the only trees it can use to transverse a particular area, 0.3 of a hectare is a lifeline.
Thanks,
So,
Tim. Can you wrap up in about 20 seconds?
I'm just about to wrap up in about 20 seconds.
Perfect.
So we're looking to see whether this model can be extended both interstate and nationally and internationally. We want to see whether this can be used by universities to teach and train students. And can those citizens be empowered to both take ownership and make a difference? And thanks to the small AEL grant and partners, let's see.
Brilliant.